The Life Esidimeni inquest is underway at the High Court in Pretoria. It was halted earlier this month due to various admin issues. 144 mentally ill patients died after being moved from Life Esidimeni to often poorly resourced NGOs. The majority of the patients died as a result of malnutrition and neglect. The inquest will determine whether anyone should be held criminally liable. Let me take you to ETV reporter Rianté Padayachee, who is tracking that story and joins us now to give us an update. So, Rianté, the last few days, I think the last 2 days, in fact, since yesterday, the inquiry getting underway in earnest, the inquest. We've been hearing from some officials, including those that worked closely or, represented the former MEC, Qedani Mahlangu. Just sum up for us the key evidence that has come out since the inquest resumed.
Good day, Tulas. Well, since yesterday, as you mentioned, the inquest finally got underway after quite a few setbacks. But we've been hearing from Dr. Basukum Kachwa. Now, he's the former managing director of Life Esidimeni, and he left the facility in about late 2015, so about 5 or 6 years ago. And he gave quite a lengthy testimony initially when the inquest began last month, and he detailed essentially how they had really tried to intervene several times and help, the Gauteng Health Department when it came to the relocation of patients. He says they tried to intervene at many points and offered their services to go and help, vet some of these NGOs where patients, mental health patients who require very specialized care were meant to go. They were going to vet these places and ensure that patients would be moved to places that could adequately care for them. However, he has repeatedly described the bad attitude, just to simplify it, of former Gauteng Health MEC Qedani Mahlangu. He says she was incredibly difficult to work with. Once her decision to terminate the department's contract with Life Esidimeni was made, nobody could change her mind. She was steadfast. And just to recap for our viewers, it said that the decision to terminate this contract with Life Esidimeni, who were taking care of more than 1,000 mental health care patients, was due to budgetary constraints and aligning the province's mental health care plan with that of the national mental health care plan.
So I can imagine then, Rianté, this is opening old wounds for the families of the deceased, right? They had to relive this entire horror and tragedy before Justice Moseneke during that particular process. And now this is more about determining if anyone should be charged criminally. Just tell me about how the families are represented and how they are coping with some of the evidence that's coming out.
Well, Tulas, 144 patients died, that we know of so far. And unfortunately, as you mentioned, many families, these 144 families had to endure gut-wrenching testimony during the arbitration hearings, which concluded back in 2018. Now, all of that information, all of that testimony has to be relived. And we've only started with witness one, Dr. Mkachwa, who's currently being cross-examined. So there are many witnesses who are still to take the stand. But very importantly, as you mentioned, this is an inquest. So in other words, it's an investigation that is trying to uncover the circumstances that led to the deaths of these 144 patients. According to just Dr. Mkachwa, who's, like I mentioned, only the first witness, he mentioned the horrid conditions that some of these patients were moved to. We've heard that patients were moved, without adequate documentation, clothing, medication. Some of them didn't have adequate food when they'd moved over, that they were sharing medication. Specialized care was needed for these patients. You cannot possibly be sharing things like medication, for example. So unfortunately, these families have to relive all of this harrowing testimony. But Tulas, I have been in communication with some of them, and all they want out of this essentially is for heads to roll. They want people to be held criminally responsible, liable for the deaths or the circumstances that led to the deaths of their loved ones.
Yeah, lastly, Rianté, I mean, while all of that is happening, at the same time, there are many people with legal interests and legal rights that they would want to safeguard even throughout this process. You're talking about Dr. Mkhatshwa being cross-examined. I imagine that among those that will cross-examine Dr. Mkhatshwa will be legal representatives of the former MEC.
Absolutely. That cross-examination took place yesterday. Today, Dr. Makgabo Manamela's senior counsel is cross-examining Dr. Mkhatshwa. And essentially, what was very interesting is Dr. Manamela worked very closely. She was the former head of mental health. She worked closely with Ms. Mahlangu, under her as former MEC. And what was shocking that I actually do want to quickly point out is when Dr. Mkhatshwa gave his testimony last, he mentioned some very shocking information, that being that Ms. Mahlangu took a trip to Brazil. And they were assessing how mental health care patients were treated in Brazil, and essentially that their family members would take care of them, but also that, if they behaved badly, they would be walking the streets in chains, which was really alarming. And Dr. Mkhatshwa said their main concern was that, they didn't want patients to be discharged back to their families and communities where people were poorer and didn't necessarily have the resources to look after their loved ones who are mental health patients. And something that Ms. Manamela agreed with when it comes to what Dr. Mkhatshwa testified about was that, Ms. Mahlangu's response to that concern was that she was once poor, lived in a small house and slept under a stove, so others could do that too. So very shocking that, some of her former colleagues are really concurring with the testimony of Dr. Mkhatshwa.
All right, thank you for that. That's important reporting there. ETV reporter Rianté Padayachee there giving us an update on the inquest into the Life Esidimeni, the deaths of the 144 mental health patients that died there. Look out for more of Rianté's reporting throughout the day here on ENCA.